As 1864 unfolded, the war reached new heights of devastation. The armies, once full of youthful idealism, were now hardened and haunted. The battles had stripped away illusions of glory, leaving raw, unvarnished human experience. Soldiers who had marched proudly months before now trudged through mud and blood, carrying not just rifles, but the weight of unimaginable loss. Sherman's march to the sea became a symbol of total war. Cities burned, crops destroyed, and civilians faced the chaos head-on. In the small town of Atlanta, families huddled in cellars as flames devoured their homes. The air was thick with smoke, ash falling like snow. Soldiers moved through the streets, some merciless, others showing fleeting mercy to civilians. These untold moments of humanity amid destruction are the hidden narrative of the Civil War, often absent from textbooks. Meanwhile, Union and Confederate soldiers continued to confront moral dilemmas. Lieutenant James Whitfield, scarred by years of combat, now found himself facing orders to advance into near-certain death. Each decision was a calculus of life and death, with personal conscience clashing against duty. The psychological toll was immense. Men experienced nightmares in daylight, haunted by choices made under fire. These are the human stories that reveal the shocking truth. War is as much a battle of the mind and soul as it is of armies. In the shadows, espionage and covert operations continued to shape outcomes. Women like Elizabeth Van Lew operated clandestine networks, smuggling intelligence and supplies. Enslaved people seized opportunities for freedom, navigating a perilous landscape of risk and courage. These acts of bravery, often unnoticed, influenced battles, saved lives, and challenged the traditional narrative of the war. The Battle of Cold Harbor in 1864 demonstrated the staggering human cost. Thousands of men charged into fortified lines, only to be cut down in moments. The ground was littered with the dead and dying, soldiers clinging to life amid the chaos. Private letters described the horror. Young men, barely adults, facing the unimaginable, praying for survival, witnessing friends torn apart by cannon and musket fire. The scale of death and despair was staggering, yet stories of courage persisted, quietly defying the carnage around them. As the war approached its final year, the surrender of Confederate forces became inevitable. Appomattox Courthouse witnessed one of history's most poignant moments. Soldiers, exhausted and broken, exchanged handshakes and embraces with former enemies. The truce was more military, it was human, a recognition of shared suffering. The untold stories of individual courage and reconciliation emerged in these moments, reminding the nation of the human cost behind the statistics. Civilian life bore its own scars. Families who had fled advancing armies returned to ruined homes. Freed African Americans began the arduous task of navigating liberty amidst persistent danger. Communities worked to rebuild, carrying both trauma and resilience forward. Diaries and letters from this period reveal stories of survival, hope, and determination, providing a human perspective often lost in military histories. The psychological toll on returning soldiers was immense. Many were haunted by what they had witnessed, struggling to reconcile their actions with their moral compass. Some found solace in rebuilding communities, others succumbed to despair. The war's end did not erase the memories of carnage, betrayal, and loss, and it would take generations to fully process the human cost. The untold truth of the Civil War lies in these personal narratives. Private Thomas Carter, Lieutenant Whitfield, spies operating in secrecy, women sheltering soldiers, freed African Americans navigating newfound freedom. All these voices form the true story. The war was not only about strategy or victories, it was about human endurance, morality,
and resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. Even in victory, the nation was forever changed. The scale of destruction, the loss of life, and the moral dilemmas faced by ordinary men and women left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. The American Civil War was the crucible in which modern America was forged, testing the very principles of freedom, loyalty, and humanity. As the last cannons fell silent and soldiers began the long march home, the echoes of the conflict lingered. The stories of courage, despair, and moral struggle became the foundation of American memory. Every act of bravery, every secret mission, every civilian risked for survival revealed that the real war extended far beyond the battlefield. It was a war of the human spirit. The war concluded, but its lessons endured. Courage in the face of adversity, moral choices under pressure, and the resilience of human beings amidst chaos. Private Carter's terror, Lieutenant Whitfield's moral struggle, the spies in darkness, and the civilians protecting lives, all are reminders that the truth of the Civil War is far more human and far more shocking than the sanitized versions often presented. And so, the story of the American Civil War continues to resonate, not merely as history, but as a reflection on the human spirit, the consequences of division, and the courage required to survive one of the most brutal conflicts in the nation's history. The untold stories, the shocking truths, and the lived experiences of ordinary people are the real legacy of the Civil War, providing lessons for generations yet to come.
They told you the Civil War was a story of heroism and victory, but the truth was far more brutal, far more human, and far more shocking. Beneath the smoke and cannon fire were stories of terror, courage, betrayal, and survival that textbooks never revealed. This is the real story, the American Civil War as it truly happened. The spring of 1861 arrived like a storm, both inevitable and devastating. The United States, young yet proud, stood on the precipice of collapse. Slavery, a deeply entrenched institution in the South, had long been the fault line that split the nation. But it was more than ideology. It was identity, power, pride, and survival. Southern states, determined to preserve their way of life, seceded, igniting a chain of events that would become the bloodiest conflict in American history. Fort Sumter was the spark. Cannons roared in Charleston Harbor, smoke billowing into the sky, signaling that diplomacy had failed. Soldiers, both seasoned and naive, answered the call. Volunteers marched from towns and farms, eager to serve, unaware of the reality that awaited them. The initial thrill of patriotism quickly collided with a stark truth. War was far more horrifying than any parade, speech, or patriotic song could convey. The first clash at Bull Run shattered illusions. Men screamed in panic and agony as the battlefield became a living nightmare of mud, blood, and smoke. Brotherhoods were broken, friends and family torn apart by ideology and circumstance. Commanders' decisions, made with incomplete knowledge, determined life and death in seconds. Amid this chaos, private letters and diaries captured the raw human experience: fear, despair, fleeting courage, and desperate hope. Private Thomas Carter, a young man from Pennsylvania, experienced his baptism of fire at Bull Run. He had imagined glory, marching under banners with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Hours later, his dreams were replaced by terror. The screams of dying men and the acrid smell of gunpowder became his world. Each step forward was a battle between instinct and fear. His story, like countless others, was untold.
overshadowed by statistics and official reports, yet it reflected the human cost of the war in its purest form. Meanwhile, Confederate Lieutenant James Whitfield faced a moral crucible. Ordered to charge against fortified Union positions, he saw clearly that many would die needlessly. Obedience could bring honor, refusal could bring court-martial or execution. His conscience waged war against duty, and in his internal struggle, the complexity of this conflict became evident. The Civil War was never merely about geography or politics. It was about human choices under extreme duress. As the conflict raged, everyday life in the camps added another layer of horror. Disease spread faster than bullets, starvation gnawed at stomachs, and exhaustion weakened resolve. Soldiers wrote letters home, often burning them to conceal their despair. Friendships formed amidst the mud and misery, bound by shared suffering and a fragile hope for survival. These quiet stories of human endurance are the backbone of the Civil War's untold narrative. The year 1862 brought Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history. Over 22,000 casualties fell in a single morning. Soldiers faced hellish choices: advance through deadly fire or retreat into certain chaos. Courage and fear intertwined in every heartbeat. Medics and nurses worked relentlessly, often risking their own lives to drag men from the mud and smoke. In these moments, heroism and humanity revealed themselves amid the carnage. But the war was not only fought on open fields. Espionage and intelligence operations played a decisive role. Women, slaves, and civilians became unlikely participants, carrying messages, hiding fugitives, and sabotaging enemy lines. Harriet Tubman's efforts in intelligence missions exemplified this untold aspect. Courage in darkness, strategy in secrecy, the lives of many resting on a single daring act. The Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 escalated the war to a new scale. Thousands of men perished, yet each individual story mattered. Soldiers advanced through smoke and carnage, facing artillery fire that could obliterate entire companies. Private letters describe moments of terrifying clarity: a comrade's death at one side, a fleeting glimpse of mercy, and choices that would haunt survivors for decades. Civilian families experienced the war's reach firsthand, hiding, fleeing, and struggling to survive in towns torn by armies. Union victories at Vicksburg and the Mississippi campaigns shifted the strategic landscape but intensified human suffering. Siege, starvation, and disease afflicted soldiers and civilians alike. Sherman's march to the sea in 1864 introduced a grim reality: total war. Farms burned, cities destroyed, and morale crushed. Yet in this darkness, stories of compassion persisted. Soldiers sparing lives, families sheltering the displaced, and communities persisting despite devastation. These acts, often overshadowed by battlefield statistics, form the heart of the Civil War's true narrative. By 1865, the nation was exhausted. Hundreds of thousands dead, countless wounded, and a country divided physically and emotionally. Soldiers returned home, haunted by memories, struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. Freed African Americans faced new challenges amidst uncertain freedom. Towns and cities began to rebuild, carrying forward both scars and resilience. The Civil War was not just a series of battles. It was a human story. Private Thomas Carter's fear, Lieutenant Whitfield's moral struggle, spies in the night, civilians hiding in attics, all represent the untold human experience of this brutal war. Courage, fear, resilience, and tragedy intertwined, creating a narrative that is as shocking as it is essential to understanding American history. As dawn broke over fields scarred by years of conflict, the nation stood on the edge of transformation. The cost of war was visible, not just in graves and ruins, but in the indelible mark it left on the human soul. The story of survival, bravery, and moral complexity would echo across generations, shaping the identity of a country that had faced the unthinkable.